Good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
Becca,
Madam
can
Stella,
you
we
hear
can
me?
hear you. Morning.
Yes, we can, Stella.
Good morning, everyone, to this webinar. I welcome you all on this morning of the 24th of January. A special welcome to my fellow panelists, Commissioner Immaculate Kasait and Engineer Stephen Wangwe. Today, we are going to talk about the landscape of data protection and privacy in the East African community. This landscape, in terms of data protection and privacy, like in many other things, is rapidly changing, with more than half, that is 4 out of 7 partner states that have enacted data protection and privacy laws. This includes Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania. On this webinar, we are happy to be hosting the Commissioner from Kenya, Mrs. Immaculate Kasait. We are also happy to host Engineer Stephen from Tanzania. And obviously, I'm also here, so we'll have an interaction or a discourse on what is happening in our relevant countries. The objective of this webinar is intended to discuss the status of implementation of data protection and privacy laws in the respective countries that I've mentioned, our level of compliance and enforcement, any challenges that have emerged, and explore possibilities of collaboration between us as data protection authorities within the community. As we all know, there's a lot that we share. When you look at the regional efforts within Africa, but most especially within the EAC, we have various protocols that ensure that as much as possible, we work as one community. It's not unheard of, or it's actually very common that many of our enterprises now cross over borders. So you'll find companies that are established or are resident in Kenya, but they're actually providing services in Uganda, in Tanzania, in DRC, in Rwanda, across the East African region. So these discussions, I believe, are very important for us because in many cases, when we offer services, we actually take personal data to be able to identify our customers, to be able to serve our customers. And it's very important that we know what is the data protection regime in those various countries. Hopefully, as much as possible, we can also collaborate so that when it comes to issues of enforcement, we do not have companies that are working in Uganda and are not complying, and yet they are affecting citizens in Kenya or vice versa, or even in Tanzania. To discuss the above, we have esteemed speakers from the different EAC countries that have passed data protection laws. In my humble view, we could not have gotten better speakers to give us information on the status of data protection and privacy in their respective countries. Before I introduce them, allow me to ask them to briefly say good morning to our participants, starting with Commissioner Immaculate.
I knew Stella, you'd call me first. Good morning.
Sorry, we can't
Stella.
hear you. I
Hear
personally can't hear you.
Well, okay. Good morning. Can you hear me now? Okay. Just give me a second.
Unless it's me.
Oh, Stella,
It's probably
we can
me. I don't know
hear
what's going on. Please go ahead as I sort my issues out. And then after you, we'll have Engineer Stephen say a good morning to our participants. Commissioner Immaculate, please proceed. It appears the participants can hear you.
Oh.
Oh, now I can hear you. Fantastic.
No, I took off my headphones. I was using that earlier, but that's fine. Thank you, Stella, and it's good to see you again, and welcome on board, Tanzania. My name is Immaculate Kasait, the Data Commissioner for Kenya.
Thank you very much, Immaculate. Happy to see you. Can we move on to Engineer Stephen, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Stella. Yes, good morning, everybody. This is Engineer Stephen Wangwe. I'm with the Ministry of Information, Communication and Information Technology in the United Republic of Tanzania, and I head the cybersecurity unit in our ministry. Thank you.
Okay, you're all welcome. Now that our participants have seen you, I'll proceed to introduce you or to give them some highlights about you. I'll start with Mrs. Immaculate Kasait. She's an MBS, and I'll explain that below. She's the first Kenya Data Commissioner with 12 years working experience in the public sector, managing complex projects in governance, training, compliance, and strategy. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya of 14 years standing. She's a building resource in democracy governance and elections facilitator. Immaculate holds a master's in business administration from USIU Africa, a postgraduate diploma in law from Kenya School of Law, and an undergraduate degree in law from Makerere University. Yeah. In November 2020, she was appointed as the first data commissioner in the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner and has been instrumental in setting up institutional structures and the legal framework for the institution. She was the chair of the task force that developed the 3 sets of regulations that operationalized the Data Protection Act, Kenya 2019. Under her leadership, ODPC developed its inaugural strategic plan for the years 2022 to 2025 and set up a fully functional office. She has further been instrumental in positioning Kenya in the data protection map through membership to various international organizations on data protection, where I sit with her in some of those organizations. Previously, she worked at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission in different portfolios and was key in setting up institutional and management structures for the electoral management body as the first woman responsible for voter registration and electoral operation. Her contribution to the institution was the development of a database of registered voters using modern technology of 19.6 million voters and the implementation of 6 complex elections procedures in 1 day. She has experience in civil society, having worked with the Institute for Education in Democracy and FIDA Kenya in different capacities. She was awarded the Moran of the Burning Spear, and that is why she's an MBS. Presidential Award 2017 for her outstanding work in public service and continues to take part in several philanthropy activities as part of her community work. Please join me to welcome Mrs. Immaculate Kasait to this webinar. I'll move on to introduce Engineer Stephen Wangwe, who is a professional registered engineer in electronics and communication. He majored in project management and with specialized skills and over 10 years of experience in the area of cybersecurity. He's currently Assistant Director under the Ministry of Information, Communication and Information Technology, Tanzania, heading the section of cybersecurity, and has, among other duties, worked on the preparation of the AU Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection of 2014 and the SADC Model Laws on Cyber Laws of 2010, the ratification of the ESC Protocol on ICT Networks by URT, guideline for institutions responsible for combating cyber crimes in the URT, National Cybersecurity Strategy, which I believe is currently running in Tanzania for the years 2018 to 2023, the National Cybersecurity Communication Strategy of 2022 to 2026, and other corporate documents, including disaster recovery plans, ICT policies, and of course, the recent preparation until promulgation of the Personal Data Protection Act of 2022. And on that note, I would like to congratulate Tanzania on passing its law. With those introductions, please join me to welcome our panelists today. I think I will briefly speak about myself. Many of you know me, but for our colleagues from Kenya and Tanzania, my name is Stella Alivatese. I'm an advocate of 26 years experience, and I currently work with the Personal Data Protection Office as the National Personal Data Protection Director. The bulk of my work has been in the ICT sector, where I've contributed greatly to the development of regulations and laws in the sector, including the Personal Data Protection and Privacy Act in Uganda. I hold a Master's of Laws from the University of London, a postgraduate diploma in project planning and management from UMI, a postgraduate diploma in legal practice from the Law Development Center, and a Bachelor of Laws degree from Makerere University. I'm a GIAC certified professional under the law of data security and investigations, and an IAPP certified information privacy manager. So those are the people who are going to speak to you today. Now, I would like us to go into the webinar directly, and I'll raise this question with my fellow panelists, starting with Mrs. Immaculate. What is the status of implementation of the data protection and privacy law in Kenya? Okay. Over to you, Immaculate. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stella. And let me first start by thanking you for actually organizing this webinar. It is long overdue in terms of conversations around our region, and it's a great stride towards the right direction. I know it's a webinar. We have a few minutes, the quick response to your question on the landscape of data protection. For those who are joining us for the first time, just a quick background in terms of where Kenya is. Kenya passed the Data Protection Act in November 2019. After the passage of it was enacted. And of course, the basis of the Data Protection Act is really around making sure that the rights of the data subjects are protected. Once this was passed, then we got the Office of the Data Commissioner on board. And then after that, our first priority, of course, was to, one, get the institutional structure and also get the legal framework, because with only the act is not possible to implement without the regulation. So we have 3 sets of regulations to help us implement the act. They came into force last year, January, and of course registration last year, July. We have the Data Protection General Regulation, Data Protection Complaint Handling, and Data Protection Registration. Just to highlight some of the things that we've been able to do in terms of the office since it was set up in the act came into force in 2019, the office was established in 2020. We've established the register of data controllers and data processors. Since last year, we are at 1,400. We have conducted oversight, issued advisories to different government institutions, promotion of self-regulation by publishing different guidance notes. We have guidance notes on data protection impact assessment. We have guidance notes on the electoral process. We have a guidance note on the registration. We are now in the process of putting together a team to help us with sector-specific guidance notes to help those specific sectors on fintech, health, agriculture, and telecommunication. We have also received complaints. We have received over 2,000 complaints. We have been able to admit 733. We have issued 2 enforcement notices. We've issued 1 penalty notice. We have issued 2 determination on complaints lodged in the office, and we have also developed an alternative dispute resolution framework. We continue to create awareness using our social media platform. We have conducted inspection. We are currently doing audit for 40 digital lenders. We are members of the Common Thread Network. We are also members of the network for African Data Protection Unit, and we also recently joined the Global Privacy Network. We're in the process of seeking observation status observation status at the Convention 108. You will note in matters data protection, international collaboration, like has been said by Stella, at a regional level, at an East African level, at a global level, is the only way you can be able to share best lessons learned, and also be able to make some of the mandate like enforcement a reality. I think I'll stop there in terms of what we have been able to implement in as far as the Data Protection Act is concerned. Thank you, Stella, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Of course, given the limited time, you really tried, but there's a lot that you have done. Congratulations on that. Let's quickly hear from Engineer Stephen. And the question is the same. What is the status of implementation of data protection laws in Tanzania?
Okay, Stella, thank you very much. And it's very nice hearing such a vast experience from Commissioner Immaculate. We have a lot to learn. Actually, for the case of Tanzania, we have the parliament had passed the bill by November last year, and in December last year, our president acceded, and it became a law. So our law is the Personal Data Protection Act of 2022. And as of now, we are already preparing the regulations, and we are starting with 2 regulations. One is for the registration for data controllers and data processors, and the other one is for handling of complaints. So we are in the process of finalizing these 2 draft regulations, which probably we'll have them ready by early February. And the next move is to rush with the establishment of the commission, or the Data Protection Commission Office, which is also underway. I cannot say which month, but in the next 2 or 3 months, we'll have it already up and running. So we are going to be visiting some of you, like Kenya, Uganda, and other countries in Africa, which already have this office in place, so that we can we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we can straight away go to the actionables, which are the things to do first, and where should you start. What we shouldn't have to repeat the same mistakes that you people who have already gone forward with this have already done the stuff. So yeah, that's it for us. It's still a baby act, but it's already in place, and we look forward to learn a lot so that we can have it more practical. And also, just one thing I was almost going to forget to mention, that in the month of February, we plan to do a big awareness to all the stakeholders, especially the potential data controllers and data processors, but also the data subjects and all the people in the country, so that the act becomes meaningful to the Tanzanian society. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that submission. Obviously, many of us would not have known how far you've gone in terms of preparation. I agree with you entirely that in many cases we needn't reinvent the wheel, but we can leverage on what other people have done. And that is one of the reasons why we thought that we need to have these conversations, and we need to have them on an annual basis so that we understand better where we all are, where we can help each other, where we can leverage on the work that has been done by other countries. To ensure that all the participants at least get value from this session, I think it's also important for me to briefly talk about where we are within Uganda in terms of implementing the Data Protection and Privacy Act. Our act was passed in May 2019, and we're only able to gazette our regulations in 2021. So the actual implementation of the law started in August 2021, after the regulations had been passed and the office had been set up. In Uganda, the law is implemented by the Personal Data Protection Office, which is an independent office that was established within another organization, which is the National Information Technology Authority, Uganda. When we have time, I'll explain what the differences are. Our main function is to oversee the implementation of and be responsible for the enforcement of the Data Protection and Privacy Act and the regulations thereunder. Our main focus since we were set up was to create awareness, to operationalize the office, to develop guidance notes and toolkits, and then of course, ensure compliance. So we are not very different from Kenya, but Kenya is a little bit ahead of us in terms of work on the ground. For the last financial year, we were able to conduct 150 awareness sessions. We issued 3 guidance notes. We developed a lot of internal procedures that are helping us in terms of doing our work. And then, of course, we automated our registration process. Many of you are able to get a lot of content in regard to what we are doing. We do monthly webinars where we talk about issues to do with data protection. And we found that those monthly webinars have been very, very useful, especially to our data protection officers. On matters of compliance, we've currently registered 1,200 entities from the last year of 400 entities. So this year we've seen an increase in the number of registered entities. We've conducted audits. We did our first test audits, about 10 of them, with our largest organizations, and we are finalizing those reports. We have also automated the complaints procedures, and as of now, we have over 3,000 complaints. Of course, we have a number of challenges. Due to our staffing challenges, it really takes us time to review and resolve many of those complaints. We are working on innovations to see how all the complaints can be reviewed quickly and easily, and ensure that we only focus on those parties that are not able to resolve the issues between them. We are members of NADPA, which is the Network of Data Protection Authorities. We are observers with the Commonwealth Thread Network, which is a network of data protection commissioners within the Commonwealth. And of course, we are looking at other international bodies. When it comes to issues of data protection and privacy, having that international connection is very important, because it helps you to ensure that even when you have enforcement challenges, there's someone that you can talk to and ensure that we have that global protection for all of us, especially in this digital space. I hope that gives you a brief highlight on where we are in Uganda. If you need more information, our digital channels have a lot of information on that. My next question goes to Commissioner Immaculate. How do you prioritize your enforcement activities, and how do you decide which cases to investigate or pursue? Congratulations on issuing your first penalty. I'm watching that space closely to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Over to you, Immaculate.
I might laugh, but well, it's a long story that can be taken offline, Stella. Of course, for any data protection, just to give a background, for any data protection authority, the real test is in enforcement and making that determination. And many times this is guided really by and large law, and there are two schools of thought. This people will say, of course, data protection is an issue of a constitutional matter. And proponents will say this is a constitutional matter, why should it be taken to a regulator? That, having not said that, nonetheless, we have the powers to investigate and issue enforcement notices or penalty notices. But under our act, we are allowed to actually serve an enforcement notice. And really, this is from a point of if there's a complaint or is sui generis, we actually take up the issue amongst ourselves. Then we are able to then look at the matter. But just to give you a feeling of what exactly happens, our processes for filing and enforcement is actually mostly done online. We receive the complaint from our end. We are able to use what I had mentioned earlier. We have a guidance note on enforcement, where we are able to then look through and make a determination in terms of whether the complaint meets the threshold. And some of determination, what you will have to consider, who is filing this matter? Is it within the jurisdiction of us? Because sometimes we receive complaints that are outside our scope of work. When we screen, and we have an entire procedure in terms of what we do. Once we screen, is then we make a determination whether this is something we can admit or something we may not be able to admit. Once we admit, of course, then we undertake an investigation. And once we undertake an investigation, and we've made it very clear in our regulations that you give people benefit of doubt. You give them an opportunity to defend themselves in accordance to the fair hearing, so that there's a correspondence between us, the complainant, and the data subject. And once we conclude the investigation, we then make a determination whether we are going to issue an enforcement notice if there was a violation. And in case there's no response whatsoever, then we issue a penalty notice. But what are the issues in terms of where do we decide what to prioritize? One of the factors that we take into account is numerous complaints. For instance, one of the issues has been a lot of complaints around digital lenders. That's one issue that you then decide. If you're receiving this number of complaints on digital lenders, then that's something you need to investigate in terms of priority. Of course, the other one, we received quite a bit of complaints initially was political parties. Then, of course, once you have that, then you can take up a test case, meaning it's one case, you take up the first case because there are so many other similar ones like digital lenders. And of course, the other thing that can make you make a determination is in issues of whether it's a high priority, whether it is a high profile case or not. So those are some of the consideration in terms of making a decision on what to prioritize and what not to prioritize. No, all I have to insist that all matters are important. Please remember, at the end of the day, the task of a data protection authority is to protect the rights of a data subject. So there is no less important or important matter. The issue is the magnitude. What is the impact in terms of that kind of a case? So impact to the data subject is something that you really always have to take into account. as you consider what is priority. But I also have to say, one of the challenges, even as Stella, it's not unique to Kenya, we have is in terms of if you look in if you're receiving 3,000 complaints in a year, and you have probably 10 or less staff who have to deal with it, you can see in terms of making sure you're doing this quickly as fast as you can, there might be challenges. Nonetheless, having said that, we try our very best to make sure we address all the concerns by acknowledging all the complaints that have been dealt or that have been brought to attention within good time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Immaculate. The complaints are really, really overwhelming, and just like yourselves, we are trying to look at alternative dispute resolution so that we are only left with those that are very critical. I agree with you that in some cases, you look at a trend, just like yourselves, we've started getting complaints on digital lenders. So your investigation will be also very interesting for us. To Engineer Stephen.
Stella, you allow me to just interject a bit on that one. In
yes.
some cases when you, and this is recommended to data protection authorities, in our interaction with the European data protection authorities who've been here longer than us, in a case where you see a common trend, it means there is an issue in the market. So many times it's always also to issue a guidance note. It is very recurrent, and that's what we did for the case of political parties, because it was very recurrent. We issued a guidance note on processing personal data in as far as election is concerned. And the same for, that's why we are also prioritizing issuing a guidance note on digital lenders. Because you see, then there must be something that either the industry doesn't completely understand or it's completely unclear. So when we issue guidance notes, it helps in terms of addressing some of those concerns, because some of these people do it out of ignorance. They may not know. And you know, issues around data protection is a complete mind shift. Yes.
I agree with you entirely. I think what I can also add is that where a certain sector has a regulator, we've found that on our side, it really helps for the Personal Data Protection Office to work with that regulator so that we have that, should I call it an overhaul or systemic change within that industry so that the data subjects are protected. Thank you for adding that. My next question goes to Engineer Stephen. In your law, that is the newly passed law, our understanding is that public entities will be deemed registered once the law is in force. How do you plan to address a scenario in which this may be construed as attainment of compliance with all data protection and privacy principles, yet more will be required of them to comply with other areas of the law? I can say that, for instance, in Uganda, public organizations are required to register just like anyone else, but we've had a challenge with their compliance in terms of even raising awareness within government itself, the general slow movement towards compliance, budgetary issues. We charge a very small fee for registration, but you find that if a ministry did not budget for that registration fee, they will not complete their registration. So you can see them in the system, they've filled in whatever records are required, but they are not able to complete that process because of a lack of budget, even when the fee is very small. So I applaud you on the action that you've taken, but would like to know more how you'll ensure that overall compliance, because at least for Uganda, and I'm sure it is similar with the other ESC countries, registration per se is not compliance. It's just the first step. Over to you, Engineer.
Yes, thank you very much, Stella. Actually, it's true that in our Act, as per Section 21, it's the public entities will be deemed registered once the law comes into force. But with the registration of public entities, data controllers is automatic according to Section 14. Again, the private entities shall be registered through a normal registration process. So this means that regulations for registration shall provide for the roadmap of registration from lodging of application until the obtaining of registration certificates for the private entities. So for the public entities, they shall not undergo that procedure of lodging application just like the private ones. And this is due to the fact that when we were going through the attainment or the compliance of the data protection principles, you would observe that different public entities have different levels of attaining the principles. Some of them have accomplished almost 7 of the principles, some of them 2, some of them 5. So there are different levels of attainment of the data protection principles. So from that, we opted not to take them through the registration process. However, when the Act is in force immediately, it means that they are also subjected to the requirements of the data protection principles, just like the other people from the private entity. So what they will be exempted from is the registration, of course, and paying the fee. But according to the Act, the Data Protection Commissioner can still enforce all the requirements or the practices on to the public entities, even though they will not undergo the registration process. So from our end, we see to it that the challenge could be in the practicability, but according to the Act, they are deemed to fulfill all the requirements of the Data Protection Act. So the risk of public entities misconstruing the automatic registration feature as attainment of compliance with data protection principles will not be there with that assumption. So that's our take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I liked, given the challenges that we've had, I think that was quite innovative on your part, but we'll wait to see how the actual implementation within the MDAs progresses. To Commissioner Immaculate, my next question to you is how do you work with organizations to ensure compliance with the Data Protection Act in Kenya? If you wish, you could also give us a few examples on how you're dealing with government agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have often, when I came into office, my first clarion call was, or what I like to call my journey to Damascus, was when I walked into a room and I like to give this example just to make us appreciate that as a data protection authorities, we have the responsibility of ensuring that it's improvement of the ecosystem and encourage people to comply so that they're not going under the ladder and then they're still risking the lives of data subject. So we walk into a room and when you mention issues data protection, you then get a pushback because then you create panic and pandemonium because people are wondering how then do we comply with this complex issue. Please remember, in our context, we still have very few in terms of skills, specialization on data protection. It's now, I believe, in another couple of years, we will have the necessary full capacity for private and public sector. And in that in mind, when the Kenyan law was crafted, having come from it being one of the cross-cutting issues in pushing the Kenyan digital economic blueprint, to say that you can share a data protection officer, because a data protection officer then becomes in terms of governance, the person who looks inside to see what you're doing in as far as data protection is concerned. were disconnected. Going straight to what can you do in terms of compliance? Once is, I already mentioned it, issue guidance notes, because guidance note basically is a power that the data commissioner can exercise to be able to give practical guidance to the data controllers and data processors and data protection officers. Guidance notes help. And for us, we gave a guide. We knew the issue of consent was a concern. We needed to clarify. So when we came into office, that was one of the first guidance notes we issued. They are concerned, and I'm well done, Stella. I see you did a data protection impact assessment training for your DPOs in Uganda. That's a complex issue. So giving a guidance note on what data protection impact assessment is one of the issues that you use in terms of compliance. I've talked about the electoral process and also registration. We issued a guidance note on registration because our registration process is automated when we realized there were people experiencing challenges. Having said that, the other thing that we, of course, as part of also increasing compliance, we're looking at guidance. One, fintechs, I've said issues of digital lenders is real, telecommunication, health sector, agriculture, and also private security. I've seen a question on the chat about private accessing buildings. One, I know this is long overdue, but one of the issues we want to issue is a guidance note on private security firms. What does it mean? Because under the Kenyan law, you're allowed to collect information on people access buildings as part of security, given the risk of that was being addressed on terrorism by the government. But how much information should be collected? How should it be stored? That's the guidance note we want to give to the industry. Issuing advisories, and thank you, Stella, for that question. That helps a lot. When you want to help government comply, it's always good to give guidance note. And I'll give an example. When we have an expressway in Kenya, there was a lot of public outcry about how much information they are collecting, log books. It was too much. We gave a guidance note, an advisory in terms of what needed to be collected. And we saw drastic reduction of how much amount of information they were collecting. And many other examples that we have done in terms of guidance notes, including Kenya KPLC in terms of the information sharing. Those are some of the guidance notes so that people are complying with the data protection. The other one, of course, in terms of improving compliance and awareness creation. Well done, Stella, 150 sessions. That is quite commendable. We have done we've used a lot of our social media platform. We run a LinkedIn weekly update in terms of what is expected of us. Our social media, this week during Data Privacy Day, we are running awareness. We train institutions very often in terms of just them appreciating what data protection is. But we keep saying this is not an area that we can do alone. If we want change and transformation, it's something we need to put together in civil society. And of course, training curriculum, which we are partnering with the Kenya School of Government. So in terms of compliance, those are some of the interventions that you can make to make sure that the different organizations are complying. For government, the same guidance notes, awareness creation, we'll get a lot of that, and also advisories. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive response. I think on the Ugandan side, what we've seen really helps with internal compliance, as you indicated, Commissioner Immaculate, is training. So we do specialized trainings like the one we did for the practical aspects of the data protection impact assessments. We also do sector-specific training like insurance and journalism. But of course, we can't overemphasize the need to continue creating awareness. Sometimes people think you do a one-week awareness and that is it. I believe with data protection, there's a lot that we still have to do, and we need to keep people reminded of their obligations and of their rights. I'll quickly move to Engineer Stephen. how do you see the data protection and privacy landscape evolving in Tanzania in the coming years? And how are you preparing for these changes?
Yeah, Stella, thank you again. And actually, from our perspective, the way we see it, it's been changing. As you may be aware that as time goes, earlier on, the data protection and privacy landscape was focusing to solve issues in addressing basic human right principle of privacy and security of information regarding the people. But as years go, we see that the focus is shifting now. It's moving to more on fulfilling the conditions conditions to build a concrete digital economy and states in the verge of fitting into the global economy. So even from Tanzania's perspective, we are focusing on that same new focus, that is to build a concrete digital economy. As you know that personal information is one of the key ingredients of the digital economy, but also to be relevant in the digital economy and the global economy at large. As you know, the adequacy mechanism and the extraterritoriality effects from the general data protection regulations of the EU. They call for the relevance in this perspective. But I think what we should do, the first step, is to establish a legal and regulatory framework in favor of data protection and privacy among each of the member states. Each of us should have the law in place. And then the next step would be to establish partnerships, meaning like bilateral, directly country to country, but also multilateral among like the EAC bloc, again, the SADC bloc, the African Union bloc, heading towards to the EU, the Commonwealth, and the international multilateral collaborations at large. All these in the management and operation of the offices for data protection. As I think Commissioner Immaculate also alluded to the importance of engaging or having good ties with the international arena in this digital or the data protection and privacy aspect. It is more crucial due to the fact that you know that some of the data or the information is stored in the cloud. So probably the server is in X country, it's not even in your country, or the server is in more than one country. So without having a good collaboration, it won't be easy to ensure enforcement of the data protection regime. So the way we see it is that it is very important to have these multilateral agreements so that we can help establish a comprehensive and robust joint effort in the regulation of the personal data transfer and sharing among states in this digital era. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. And I think it speaks to my next question. I'll start with Commissioner Immaculate. Do you think there's a need for collaboration among data protection authorities in the EAC? And if yes, I think I know the answer to that.
Absolutely, Stella. And I think you started session by saying most of the companies that work in East Africa have a lot of cross-border data transfer. Even if nowhere else, a bank in Uganda has branches in Kenya, has branches in Tanzania. And Congo, now moving to Ethiopia, moving to Rwanda, and also in South Sudan. So we are joined by, like we say, we are joined by at the hip in terms of making sure this work. It is a partnership, it is a collaboration, and that will help businesses, and also in terms of the region. But most importantly, give our data subject, who we must always remember the reason why we are here, some comfort that their data is protected within the region. Even as we go out of the region, We already have 6 countries, different member states to work with, and that is a place to start. And you can also see that there is a movement in terms of even at the African level, in terms of the recent last year, February, when the African Union actually put together the framework on data privacy. You can see that when you move from there, you see the kind of the strength that the European Union Data Protection Board has in terms of you help in terms of unification. And even if you don't achieve unification, you help in terms of harmonization. You also help so that when you issue a guidance note, it cuts across East Africa and cuts across Africa. It also helps in terms of, like we said, data flows. It helps in terms of adequacy decisions, so that we are all speaking the same language. This conversation, I am almost sure that in the next couple of months, we'll be discussing a regional meeting on data protection. This is the place to start, so that from there, then we can build the blocks. I think economic blocks is what most people identify with, and then perhaps because one of the things you have to remember, the African free trade, the economic blocks is what drives innovation, because many people in the innovation space are also are leading in terms of making sure innovation works for their customers, whether they are banks. So it's our responsibility as key drivers of data protection culture in this region to push for that agenda.
Fantastic. Engineer Stephen, I'm assuming you have the same view, but if you have anything to add on how we can improve it, Commissioner Immaculate has already proposed a meeting within the data protection authorities. Any addition to that?
Well, I think first of all, I was very aroused by the way Commissioner Immaculate laughed when you asked that question, because it's merely not even a question. And saying about the meeting, I think it's very critical. It's very important. I agree with the proposal, and actually that next we'll be having several regional meetings. I think that's the right direction going forward. But also an area which we could look at is probably now organizing ourselves in the EAC block, so that we have a strong tie among the EAC, and then from there we can move together as a block from EAC going to the other blocks and also going to the international community. Because, for example, Tanzania is in a point whereby we are at the south of the EAC block, so we also linked to the SADC block. So we can bring experiences from the SADC block into the EAC. And for example, Kenya and Uganda, because you're in the north, you're probably linked to another block in the north or in the west of Africa, like COMESA or whichever other community. So having this getting together and bringing the blocks, making it like bigger and bigger through connection of different blocks and multilateral collaborations, I think is the right way to go. Because with data, the way it flows, data by itself in the cyberspace, it doesn't acknowledge any borders. So why should we now be tied by the borders? So we are supposed to work in the focus and direction of making sure that we break the walls and we work beyond the challenge of having national borders in this. So I think that's what I wanted to add, but very, very key and crucial points were already mentioned by Commissioner Immaculate and yourself, Stella. Thank you.
Fantastic. I agree with you entirely. So that concludes our discourse. Because of time, I would like us to quickly move to the questions that have been asked. Some of them are related actually to what we were discussing about the collaboration, but let me go through them quickly. We have Paul Mugambi from Kenya. He's asking, is there any move to unify data protection policies in East Africa addressing cross-border issues? I think that has been answered, given the submissions by Commissioner Immaculate and Engineer Stephen. These are some of the issues, if we sit together, that we can discuss and resolve, and then guide our governments to be able to agree on. I think the most important issue is for us to agree to collaborate, to have those engagements where we can discuss common issues, and then as data protection officer authorities, guide our governments on how to proceed. Paul was asking, what is a guidance note? Immaculate, would you like to take that?
That. A guidance note is simply put a code of practice. It's a code of practice. In a certain industry, I have come from a legal background. There's a code of practice that we use as lawyers, the do's and the don'ts, basically. What guides our practice? Basically, that's what a guidance note is. So when we talk about the fintech industry, what is it that data protection, the digital lenders are doing and they shouldn't? Or what is it that they should be doing actually? What is it that they should be doing? So our guidance notes help them with their journey to compliance. It tells them what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question from Joanita Nagaba. She says she has had the benefit of being acquainted with the laws across East Africa. Do you see value in undertaking ESC consultations and ensuring somewhat similar registration and compliance processes? So far, we have had to translate the Tanzanian law. These nuanced differences ultimately affect compliance that often takes the form of trade-offs. Commissioner Stephen, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I'll chip in quickly. Stella, thank you. You've called me commissioner, but I'm not yet the commissioner. I'm still just an engineer. So,
my prayer is on its way.
Amen, amen. Let it be. So, yes, it's for us, basically, you know, the law is for the citizens, right? And in our country, the language which is well versed or well known to like 100% of the citizens is Swahili. So some few years back, we passed a law that every law, the main language will be Swahili. So that's just the first language after the law has been enacted. But then after that, then we make an English version of the law. So it's not like it's going to be permanently a Swahili law. Just after some time, we're going to have also the English version. So it could be a matter of time, but from the English version, I think from there going forward, we can always have a harmonized approach and share the way forward. But again, the law itself is in Swahili, in its very, very generic state, but still, us who are translating and enforcing and pushing it to realization, we move with it in English version. So I don't really see the challenge in harmonizing, as long as you said, Stella, as long as we agree together that this is the direction, and we can sit together and see how to put the ties together and move forward on this. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Joanita had a second question. With respect to consumer protection in the digital space, Kenya has a law protecting consumers, and Uganda is yet to pass a law to that effect. Do you see value in appreciating data protection from a consumer protection standpoint? I think that is largely a question on our side. It's true Uganda does not have a comprehensive consumer protection law that is separate from other laws. However, within our various laws, there are sections that deal with consumer protection. For instance, in Uganda, consumer protection in the digital space is largely governed by the Electronic Transactions Act, which has, I believe, Part 4, that is very detailed on what kind of information you're supposed to provide a consumer, what recourse do they have, what details are you supposed to give them, when does property pass when you're doing e-commerce and things like that. So I know that under Ministry of Trade, there were efforts to develop a comprehensive consumer protection law, but the fact that that is not currently in place does not mean that we do not have consumer protection in the digital space in the country. When you look at our communication laws, there are aspects of consumer protection. When you look at the Electronic Transactions Act, some of those issues have already been dealt with. Of course, when we talk about data protection, we are talking about data subjects, and Commissioner Immaculate has been emphasizing it through her responses that we are here ultimately for the data subject. And there's no way you can address the concerns of the data subject without ultimately dealing with consumer protection. So I hope, Joanita, I've answered that question. There's a question from Mr. Emmanuel Gidudu. How best would you guide on implementation of data protection and privacy in credit financial institutions in East Africa? Immaculate, do you want to take that? I know we cannot answer this question fully here in the few minutes we are left, but you could give him a general answer as a guide. Okay, okay.
I missed, please repeat that, the last part of the question. Sorry, Stella, sorry.
The question was, how best would you guide on implementation of data protection and privacy in credit financial institutions in East Africa?
I think the principle of the 3 East African countries is the rights of a data subject. And if you're in a financial institution, data protection by default and by design. What does that mean? It means that you need to anticipate data protection at project implementation, project conceptualization, project implementation, project closure. Simply put, if you are applying a new app as a financial institution, at the point where your developers are coming up with the app, the tick boxes they should ask is an audit of where your data is, how it's being stored, how much information you're collecting, and how it will be disposed. 2 is to let the client know that you're collecting the information. Those are the rights that they need to know. And 3, when you process, you always remember the data subject is the centrality of your conversation. That way you will not go wrong. Data protection by default and by design is something that will always be on the safer side when it comes to implementing any project, whether it's in a financial institution or whether it is any other institution. I hope I'm brief.
I think you've done your best because that was a very wide question to respond to. We've run out of time, but we'll attempt in the next 2 minutes to respond to some of the questions. Paul Mugambi, we've answered many of your questions, so I'm going to skip you for now and move to Paul Mboya. Would it be possible to consider a single registration certificate within the region? I think that would be possible, provided we've harmonized and we've agreed on those protocols. It has not yet happened. Obviously, we need to first engage and agree before that can be effected, because it is also impacted by our different laws within the different countries. There was a question from an anonymous attendee. All these initiatives are appreciated and commendable. How are the data protection offices demonstrating that they can take on public authorities to comply with the data laws? I think we are making efforts, and probably history will judge us. I know, for instance, in Uganda, we've given guidance to ministries, and they've actually responded to that. But of course, all of us are really in the initial stages of implementing our laws. Probably what we need is support from the community so that when we issue these notices, we get support that they are implemented. Zedi says she's appreciating the webinar. Definitely, there's no compliance without a defined data management roadmap within the internal structures. There was one question that I'll pick up from the chat room from Noah. As a data protection officer in an organization, what am I supposed to do? Noah, you're the focal point for the PDPO. If you're in Uganda, you're the contact person on all issues to do with data protection within your organization. It's incumbent upon you to train. For the Ugandan PDPO, we have a lot of information on our various digital channels. I believe even on the Kenyan side, and they will have them, and Tanzania as we go forward. Get in touch with the relevant data protection authority. At least I know Immaculate personally, and I've interacted, I think, online with Engineer Stephen. We are always willing to provide guidance to you. And there's a lot of information on our channels and generally online on the duties of a data protection officer. Ladies and gentlemen, allow us to conclude our webinar this afternoon. I want to thank my fellow panelists, Commissioner Immaculate, Engineer Stephen, for accepting our invitation. I pledge to make sure that meeting happens. Most likely to be on Zoom, but it will be a meeting nonetheless, and we'll be able to move this forward. To our participants, thank you so much for attending. Keep the fire burning. Keep informing your stakeholders about privacy. This week, all of us are celebrating Privacy Week. So do something, tag the ODPC, tag PDPO, tag Engineer Stephen Wangwe, so that we continue with this conversation. I wish you all a lovely afternoon. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Stella. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.